Hey, once again, BlackJupiter friends, I, Agent Random, am here to take you on a replay. Several years ago, I did a video about cut content in Neo The World Ends With You, and just last year, I followed that up with a video about the first game's cut content. But in the time since that first video's come out, a lot more cut content has been discovered about this game. So consider this a second volume of that first video. That's right, happy April Fools. The joke is, I'm doing an actual video this time. A video with lots of goodies that probably haven't been talked about before on YouTube, including the discovery of a certain cafe barista. Stay tuned. I would recommend watching the first volume first, but I can't make you do it. Legally. Turn around right now for a surprise. Alright, let's jump right into it. Neo spoilers galore. This game is several years old now. What did you expect? I spent some time in the last video talking about our favorite blanked-faced character who somehow managed to be a walking teaser for 3 games in a row, Tsugumi Matsune. I talked about an earlier version of her boss fight that showed Neku and Minamimoto fighting her on an earlier draft of the story. However, I am unfortunately blind, and that is just plain not Minamimoto. That is a black-tinted Neku. Shadow Neku, if you will. Please don't. But I bring up this fight to talk about how more details from an earlier version of Tsugumi's story were uncovered. Most notably, this sprite showcasing a mission's target as Tsugumi. I imagine this was from a version of the story where this would have led to Tsugumi's boss fight instead of the players just sorta going after her at the end of week 2. I'm curious what the catalyst would have been for Tsugumi to become a target in the game. Would she have been a defect like Shoka or something else? I don't know if any part of the game got added instead of this storyline, but man, it does bite to know that Tsugumi's story content was cut late enough in development for remnants to still be in the files. While I'm on the subject of addressing things that I said in the last video, I mentioned that Joshua and Shiki had unused NPC models in the files. Since then, the textures for their models have been found, and we've been able to see examples of what Joshua would look like if he were to be loaded into the field. Look, there he is. In Neo, there are 3 Scramble Slam days, which are somewhat controversial amongst the player base. I certainly don't hate them, but I do agree that I generally prefer most other days of the game to any given Scramble Slam day. However, Neo's files show that a 4th one was originally intended to happen, and if you ask me, they barely wrote it out of the story. This would have happened on week 3, day 5, when Shiba creates fake versions of the prior team leaders to fight the Wicked Twisters. The dialogue they used to reveal this in the final game makes it sound like they were about to do a Scramble Slam, but it just ends up being a bunch of standard battle encounters. My gut feeling says that the slam was cut for pacing because I really don't know what a 4th Scramble Slam would have added to this game's enjoyment factor. Or who knows, maybe this 4th Scramble Slam would have been like so epic, Neo would have actually met sales expectations. Let's talk combat changes. In the final game, pig noise battles have special graphics and text for when the battle begins or ends. In the files, sprites for beta versions of these exist where only the text is changed, but the overall style of the graphic is the same as normal noise encounters. The pins have some mechanics from the first game still left over in the files. For instance, the pin grading system is left over. Basically, pins would be given a certain type, and you could only have so many of each type in a deck. Neo really didn't need such a mechanic since your pin deck is already limited to a certain number of pins with the same input. Furthermore, boot time was originally in the game. You know how when you use up a pin, it has to recharge? The length of time that takes is called the reboot time. The boot time was a mechanic in the first game where pins would have to charge up at the start of a fight before you could use it. No pin in Neo works like that, but the mechanic is still programmed in and can be reactivated via hacking. The beat drop mechanic in Neo lets you gain sync by hitting an enemy at the right time. According to leftover data in the files, the window of time that a player would have for this used to be controlled by the chosen difficulty setting. Also, obstacles used to be in Neo. Obstacles are those items scattered around the battlefield in the first game that you could move around using telekinesis. In the final game of Neo, the telekinesis psych just spawns in items for the player to use while the psych is active. And finally for combat, it seems that at one point the player was able to restart the battle by an option in the pause menu. Hey, remember in the first game's video how I went over that game having like a bunch of unused noise symbols? Well, Neo's also got that in spades. In the Neo art book, there exists concept art for the Boomer and Drake noise from the first game that both seemingly went extinct by the time of Neo's release. Also in this screenshot showcasing the different kinds of Rex noise, there's what looks to be a flamingo noise, just sorta hanging out in the middle of the screenshot. Or it could also be a peacock, since that seems to be how it's referred to in the files. Also, is that hip snake over there? I just noticed this like in editing. The files also contain data for other noise types. These include seahorses, bees, and reapers, as in the infantry type ones like what you would fight in the first game. The Noisepedia itself also has some fun unused data. Seems at one point there is a full model and animation viewer instead of just that static image for each noise in the final game. The files contain text for the ability to view attacking animations and to rotate a model. Okay, a few other miscellaneous stuff that got left over in the files, like the character Hanekoma was very likely named Hina earlier in development, since all of her voice lines are labeled as Hina. When it comes to sprites, we have this one that shows a silhouette of Neku and Beach with a tear in between them. I have no clue whatsoever what this would be used for. Maybe some kind of explanation of how Neku and Beach's partner pack worked while Neku was in Shinjuku? I am totally spitballing there. There's an unused line sticker in the game. You know those silly little guys that characters send over text? This one's of Mr. Mew. It's left untranslated, so we know that it was never intended to be used, but I have to guess that it was intended to be used by Shoka or maybe Shiki. Also, there's an Easter egg where at Tower Records, an advertisement for Death March will be displayed. But in the files, data exists to show that this was originally intended to be an advertisement for Ali, who did Teenage City Riots, the opening theme for The World Ends With You the animation. Because, reasons, that song ended up as cut content for the show, and this Easter egg ended up as cut content in this game. Tin Pin Slammer was never considered for Neo, but Square did reportedly want to include a similar minigame at a certain point in development, but the plans for that never went through because it was believed to cause pacing issues. Okay, let's talk about Hanekoma. So as we all know, Mr. H only appears in this game as the author of the secret reports and as Fret, because he is Fret if you didn't know. But by stitching together a few things, you can see that at some point we were intended to see Mr. H as we knew him in the first game. The TWEWY Spain and RPG Spain social media accounts got to conduct an interview with the Neo staff. Nomura, my DMs are open. In this interview, they point blank asked the staff if Hanekoma was ever planned to appear in Neo and if they had made any early design concepts for him, because they had no chill and I love them for that. The staff's response, they just sort of dodged the question. But we know better, because by digging through the files, you can find the Mr. H social network entry. It's very barren and lacking any sprites or other info that would actually appear in the game, but we can confirm it's unused because the devs were kind enough to label that it was unused. The only data left aside from the name Sane Hanekoma is the label that he's a male high-ranking angel from the previous entry. This is notably the same exact note placed on Joshua's entry. Though we can be pretty sure of what his social network ability would have been, since there's also one ability that goes unused, the Mega Noise Magnet. The regular Noise Magnet is an ability that allows the player to draw noise over to them for the sake of easier chains. This ability actually appears twice on the in-game social network, since it first appears as Sumio's ability and is then later copied by Moltoy, which is hilarious, because it just does not do anything extra the second time you unlock it. But this unused text is not for a second unlock. It's straight up an upgrade and is in the files along with the other two noise magnets, so this is likely Hanekoma's ability. I respect the dedication to the bit of just not giving this ability to Moltoy. Like, they just had to have his ability be a ripoff of someone else's, even if it meant that one of the abilities would go unused. I have absolutely no idea where they were gonna place Hanekoma in this game, but it is possible that he could have been part of the game's cut chapter. Again, little info to go off of here, but the files for the main menu do contain a string of text called the chapter_side story. Crucially, this is different than the string of text denoting another day. So there is some other side chapter planned at some point. And again, we know it's unused because the devs labeled it as unused. I will stress that we do not know anything about this cut chapter. It could have been the devs pranking me across time and space. It could have been the chapter with a Coco boss fight. It could have been the chapter with nothing but Nagi explaining the lore of elegant strategy in extreme detail for 5 hours. We just don't know. But I will say that we do have unused Tsukimi sprites, unused Hanekoma data, and a lot of developer comments about how much they wish they could tell the Shinjuku story, so you know, it could have been one of those. Maybe. We don't know. Okay. So with the way that Hanekoma is this cut character with such a strong presence on the narrative, with no real existence outside of the files, one could call Hanekoma the W.D. Gaster of The World Ends With You. In fact, I already have. But there may just be one other character who's more worthy of that title. A character that we know starkly little about. There is no record of them in this game. As far as I have been able to find, there is not one hint of this character in the files or dev interviews or anything. To say that this is even a cut character at all is in of itself just a guess. This is Neo The World Ends With You's most hidden character. His name? The Butcher. Okay, I'm honestly surprised that I have not talked about this character sooner because the mystery surrounding him predates the game's release. Back before the game came out, voice actor, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Nick Shakur's IMDb got updated to list him as playing a character in Neo The World Ends With You called The Butcher. This was quickly noticed by fans, and we just generally assumed this to be a character that had not yet been announced, especially since the IMDb wasn't the only sighting of this character. Nick Shakur's own personal resume also listed him as having played The Butcher in this game. The page no longer exists, but I still do have this image of it from 4 years ago. So yeah, we had multiple sources confirming that this character existed, and we were still getting new character announcements pretty regularly, so that didn't seem out of the question. And yet the game came out without any such announcement of this character. And as I'm sure you know, bro isn't in the game itself either. And before you ask, no, despite the silhouette I'm using, Joe the meat shop guy is not the Butcher. That guy is voiced by Kaylee McKee, who also voices Eru, which as an aside, holy frick, I have never seen a more impressive vocal range. Like, wow.
Great.
So good to see ya!
But anyway, we know this is not the Butcher because Nick Shakur is still in the flipping credits. Look, there he is, credited as additional voices. All of the other voice talent that did additional voices did not announce their involvement with the game until the day of release. Yet Shakur had it listed on a public resume long beforehand. So who the frick is this character? The answer is that there is no answer. I have tried, like really, honestly tried to find out who this is. I took a note of every character, including generic NPCs, to find out who voices who. Unfortunately, there are several masculine voiced characters who have unidentified voice actors, and any one of them could theoretically be the Butcher. Or maybe it's actually just straight up a cut character. Why they would have a voice actor for that situation, I have no idea. Like, Hanekoma was cut late enough to have at least one string of text in the files, and we have no evidence that voice recording took place for him. Unless... no. Is Hanekoma Fret and the Butcher? Honestly, I have no idea. I have no clue what the deal with this character is. In my opinion, the Butcher mystery is one that far exceeds these dang finger-crossed sprites from the first game. Which, yes, by the way, did appear as early as the guidebooks for the first game's release. I know I did a goof, I'm sorry. But yeah, if you out there, dear viewer, happen to have a dang clue who the Butcher is, or if you are Nick Shakur and want to tell us what's up, shout it from the rooftops. I want the truth to come out. Seriously, it's been like 4 years now. Who the frick frack is this man? Super duper big thank you to Marin for helping make this video happen at all. Both in the realm of like technics, like straight up, I would not be recording this right now if it were not for him. He is a savior. And also for making the cutting room floor page that most of the information in this video was drawn from. The link is in the description for you to go and dig through yourself. There's a couple other goodies in there that I didn't talk about in this video, so you should look at it. It's a fun time. Quick BlackJupiter update. I know a lot of you are curious about the fan dub project I announced for the World Ends With You Reynatus crossover in the last video. Going super well. We are fully cast and we are just fully in production. I do not know when it will release, but I know that we're all working very hard. Small previews are getting posted over on the Patreon, so if that's an interest of you, you might want to go check that out. And speaking of, thanks to our current patrons. Bacon and Certain Noun, Kaiser, Willpower784, Wonderland Snack, The Missing Samurai, and Venforia. Seriously, if you guys have any clue on the Butcher's identity, please tell us. Okay, bye.